chef.
Hey, how y'all doing? This is MongoSlade, and today we're going to talk about the Broken Skull sessions with Bayley. And you know what? I really get kind of a weird feeling doing Broken Skull sessions with people who are still on the roster actively. Most of them don't really have any good road stories and stuff like that to tell. There's no really good nuggets to get into because they've exposed these kinds of people so much. Like Bayley has done so many documentaries and different things like that we kind of already know her story, but then there's still some interesting things that we can get into. The first thing I want to talk about though is that how WWE seems to have been changing the rules. Like they never used to talk about the PWI thing. Like they spent some time talking about the PWI, Bayley being number one in PWI. And it's like, that's weird. WWE would even put that over. Like they usually don't care about stuff like this. Like they usually don't care about Mark magazines and what they think about these people. But that was really weird. So I was interested, of course, in listening to Bayley's story. I'm always interested in knowing the backstory of these people. And the younger they are, the better. And Bayley is even younger than Drew McIntyre. And Drew McIntyre, again, as we talked about, was one of those guys who had Stone Cold Steve Austin bed sheets. And Bayley's even younger than him. I think she's 31 and he's like 36 or something like that. So you talk about Bayley, as far as her fandom. I really liked the stories of her fandom. Basically, she talked about how she did these fan expos, how she met Rey Mysterio at a Popeyes, and she went to meet John Cena in San Francisco. She had her dad just running her around to all these different sites. I mean, all these different sign-ins and things like that. And and this was good because it was the basis for her hugger character, which is essentially a super fangirl. And I really like that. Like, I like that they used this, as a chance to say, hey, all of her NXT success, because the hugger was kind of a success on the main roster, but we'll get there in a moment. But she basically talked about how this was sort of the beginning of her success, where the character came from. And I really like that. So she said she started watching wrestling when she was 12 or 13 years old. But when she decided to become a wrestler is when she first saw Lita. And she talked about how, Lita was different from all of the other women. And she basically says, like, I can never be like Trish Stratus, but I could be like Lita. Because she was a tomboy. And she felt like, Lita was still kind of sexy, but also very athletic. And, she couldn't be like Trish Stratus. I think the Trish Stratus thing was basically the looks. She couldn't be as out as Trish Stratus, the big boobs and beautiful and stuff like that. It basically made wrestling inaccessible to her. And that makes sense, I get it. It's weird, but I get it. And she talked about, going to independent shows. And she talked about how indie shows humanized wrestling for her that made her feel like she could do it. And I really had a negative reaction to that. Like, I really did. Like, because the magic of wrestling is it being big and you feeling like I can't possibly do that. And then you go to a small indie show, as Bayley said, and you do see that they're just normal people with not a lot of, like I made a joke about, the OVW show about one of those guys looking like he teaches 4th grade art class. And when you see like those kind of guys are wrestlers, then you do believe that you can do it. And then you start seeing people who can, who jump into it, and that's why, it's just a cascade effect about why wrestlers aren't larger than life like they should be. Like wrestlers should be larger than life. They should be superheroes. But then you have enough people who go to like indie shows, or they see guys who have second jobs, and you're like, ugh, wrestling ain't all it's cracked up to be. But she said that she started training at Big Time Wrestling. She met them when she was 17, but she came back at 18 because her mom wouldn't let her go. And she said she trained for 6 months before she had her first match, and she was the only girl in the class. And they talked about bumps, and Bayley's talking about how running the ropes was really hurting. Like she really hurt running the ropes, and the flip bumps like snapmares and suplexes were really killing her because she didn't know how to plant her feet as she was going backwards. And basically she was tearing up her ankles and stuff like that. which tells you that you probably that's a don't try this at home kind of thing, because that's one of the first things people don't realize is, when you're taking a suplex, people just go back and you tear your ankles up. But whatever. She basically said that Serena Deeb, she talked about Serena Deeb, that Serena Deeb gave her confidence, and that she was a former tag team partner, and Serena Deeb helped her get into Shimmer. And Steve Austin was like, how much did watching from TV help you? And she talked about how she got a little bit from watching Tough Enough. And Steve kind of shrugged like, oh no. like Tough Enough. But Bayley was like, I watched it, kind of to get an idea, but it's not like it gave it away. And I was like, okay, Tough Enough. Okay. Anyway, she said she got a tryout in WWE because Elias used to be a referee, and that she sent her information to him, and he was the contact, and she ended up getting a 3-day tryout in WWE. And she was the only woman wrestler there, that the other women were basically she just said athletes, quote unquote. And I think she just mean like bodybuilders and stuff like that. So that makes sense. So they played a couple of clips, which is really the strong suit of this show, is that they show like a lot of clips to tie everything together. And they showed some clips of Bayley in promo class and how she couldn't hold her head up. She didn't really have that much confidence. And they were asking her, I think they said the producer name was Chris, and saying that what would happen if she didn't make it? And then Bayley would say, well, at least it would be so good for other people. And then he was like, but what if this is the closest you ever get? Like, you don't get, and she was in FCW at the time. What if you never make it? And then she just kind of put her head down, and she said she didn't really know what to say. And, and then Bayley's talking about, like, this was at a point in time when she didn't know who she was. She was just a wrestling fan that wanted to wrestle. And they was trying to figure out how to get to the core of who she was. Because she didn't put it in these terms, but she's basically just a mechanic. She just knew to show up with her gear and go in there and wrestle. They was trying to figure out her personality. Who is she? Why does she want to do this? Yada, yada, yada. But they couldn't find it. And then she says that to come up with the Hugger, the super fan character, the Hugger gimmick, is that it was Dusty's idea to basically partner her with other people. Like, she didn't have anything interesting to say on her own. So what they did was they partnered her with other people. And she said she ended up being partnered with Summer Rae. And that she says that when she was doing with Summer Rae, was basically she just decided to be a dork. And that she took tips from the Mickie James, Trish Stratus storyline, from the lesbian angle, and basically how she doted on Summer Rae, and it came across. And she went and watched the Molly Shannon movie Superstar, which is perfect. And it wasn't until she said it that I really thought about, because I've seen that movie at least once, and it makes sense that she would take those sort of dorky ideas, and she kind of put them into a character that she was a super fan of Summer Rae. And that's kind of how the Hugger gimmick was born. And that she took, these pieces from the Mickie James and Trish Stratus story and mixed them with Molly Shannon's Superstar. And basically, she said it felt natural to her to be a super fan, because that's what she's always been. Like, she's always been the person that goes and, oh my God, I love John Cena. Oh my God, I love Rey Mysterio. And that's kind of like, since that's how she's always been, it felt natural for her to do that. And that's how the character came. And, she added the tassels because she said she loves Macho Man. So it was like all of these things that just kind of happened. And I said to myself, damn, that is dope. That is kind of dope how they took her real personality, blowed it up to like a 10, and then wrapped it in like colorful packaging and basically sold it to everybody. Like, that's pretty much who she is. And she says, like, the character worked in NXT because it was relatable, and because, it was her. It was who she was, and she didn't want to be larger than life. Of course, that's another red flag, and you should always want to be larger than life, because otherwise you're not a star. And this comes into some stuff that she says later about how she feels the company doesn't really see her on the same level as the other 4 horsewomen. And it's like, because you want to be relatable, and they kind of don't, right? And that's pretty obvious. We'll talk about that when we get there. So she basically said that she felt a natural bond with the audience, because that was that's who she was. So she was bonding with them on that level. And so then she started talking about the four horsewomen of NXT and where the idea came from. And basically the idea came from Ric Flair, who, obviously the father of Charlotte, and how they were working on top and they felt like the four horsemen to him. And she talked about how Ronda and Shayna would kind of disagree with this, about them being the original four horsewomen. But she's like, we're the original four horsewomen. And basically the relationship that she's got with Sasha Banks, which was a little too much time spent on that in this documentary, in this conversation. There was at least 4 or 5 times where they kept bringing up Sasha Banks. But I mean, that's kind of how Bayley is now, where she's basically known in association with Sasha Banks, and that's kind of that kind of sucks, because Bayley is really good. But her association with Sasha Banks is kind of how she's known. Of course, they go through the match with the Brooklyn match, with her. And I love that Steve Austin was going through this match, like how much of a fan of it he was, and that he was willing to give her feedback and stuff like that as far as, the spots that they were going through. And that was really interesting. So the next thing that I found was really interesting is her saying she was the locker room leader after everybody left. And Steve Austin basically asked her, like, did you take up the responsibility, or was it like there was nobody else, so it's got to be me? And then Bayley just kind of sat there and was like, oh. Like, I always try to bring everybody together anyway. She said, like, I was always trying to bring everybody together anyway, but it was because she was the only one left. She didn't say it, but that is kind of how it was, that she was the big sister in the locker room. Like, she was the only main event woman until Asuka came along to take her spot. She was the only one there. And she was like, hey, and she talked about this as far as WrestleMania, I think it was 32, when they reintroduced the women's championship and they got rid of the Divas title, how she wasn't there. She was in the crowd, and that she was frustrated because they had already been called up. And, Sasha, Bayley, and Charlotte had already been called up. And they were in that match, I believe. I believe that was the 3 of them. And she was in the crowd. But she felt like she's always been the tag-along. Like, she's always been the one in the back. And they've been out front. And I felt like that was probably the most interesting stuff in this documentary. I want to keep calling it a documentary. In this conversation. And I really would have liked for them to drill into that. Like, because that does seem to have, and it's very, very true, that Bayley is the one that people kind of sleep on. Even when I did my, I still get notifications about people who find my ranking the 4 horsewomen, and they still sending me like, Bayley is the best one, or Sasha Banks is the best one. And I'm like, this is from like last year. Like, it's one of my early videos too. But maybe I'd have to do a remix of that, for an update. Probably have to do a yearly update. But anyway, they did talk about how, so when she was the locker room leader in NXT, how she was sort of the mentor for Lacey Evans and Liv Morgan and Carmella and a lot of the other women who were still there. And she was basically just sitting back waiting to get called up. And she says that, it even got to the point where Sasha Banks had supposed to have been called up before, but they kept Sasha in NXT so they could have at least one more match. They ended up being the Iron Man match that they had together. And that Sasha was already supposed to be gone, but they kept her in NXT just a little bit longer just for that match so they could have that first ever women's Iron Woman match. So Bayley says she gets called up, and, she's, of course, sitting in the crowd at WrestleMania. And she said she felt like she was part of it because she was there in person, but she was in the crowd. Like, she wasn't even backstage. Like, that's kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy. So she basically said she started getting annoyed when she wasn't called up yet. That she kind of felt like the company didn't care about her, like she had been forgotten, like she wasn't important. And, like, that frustration was something else that was very palpable in this conversation, that she is sort of the workhorse, and she hasn't been given the same opportunities, even though she's kind of gotten unique opportunities of her own. So this was an interesting thing too, is when they talked about Bayley getting booed in Toronto. And I completely forgotten about this. that in 2017 on an episode of Raw, Bayley was injured and she was talking, basically doing the baby face. Oh, thank you guys for your tweets and your get well soons, and people were booing her and how she got frazzled, and she tried to save it. Like the clip they showed was of her saying, "Well, those of you who are not booing, don't worry about that. But I thank all of you who are not booing me right now." And how she said like she was devastated because she was a babyface, and when you getting booed as a babyface, you have to go face your boss and explain like, why am I being booed, even though it's obviously not her fault. But I want to pause right here for a moment and pontificate a bit. I remember, I wish something telling me I should have started my YouTube channel in like 2014, right? Because I was, and I know it's like easy to say this now because it's 3 or 4 years later, 6 years later or whatever, but I was saying that the hugger gimmick was going to get eaten alive in NXT. I mean, like when it left NXT, it was going to get eaten alive. People kept saying she's going to be the girl John Cena. And I was like, you realize John Cena gets booed out of every building that he's in, right? He was getting booed out of every building. So when everybody was like, I just remember there were so many people, especially the Mark websites and stuff like that were saying Bayley is going to be huge. She's going to be such a big star. She's so relatable. Everybody likes her. Everybody loves Bayley. And I was like, the moment she comes on Raw or SmackDown, with the colorful stuff, with the smiling, she was going to get destroyed. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. She came, it worked for a little while. It connected with the kids, but Raw and SmackDown's audience is mostly adults. And they're just going to be like, boo, you suck, Bayley. Because there's no angles to that character. And that actually is something that she talked about too here, when she talked about the character being limiting to her. That the company didn't see that character, the hugger, the colorful hugger character, as being somebody that could be in dangerous situations. Because the character was so safe, they didn't see the character being involved in Elimination Chamber matches or Hell in a Cell matches or even ladder matches and stuff like that. So she said like she felt like the character, the matches that were grittier were not for her. So therefore, she didn't put her in those positions. And I was like, that's crazy. I didn't ever even thought about that. But if you do think about that, that is how like they avoided some of that stuff with John Cena too, right? It wasn't until like John Cena's later years, like his early years, right? He was in those blood and guts matches with like JBL and people like that. And then there was a stretch where he didn't really do a lot of Hell in a Cell matches, Elimination Chambers and stuff like that. And they kind of kept him away from it. And then, near the end, of course, all that stuff came back. Once they like got rid of the blood and everything, he kind of came back in that spot. But it seemed like Bayley was one of those kind of characters where they kind of was like, and I remember like they did a kendo stick on a pole match with Bayley and Alexa Bliss, but they wouldn't let Bayley use a kendo stick. Like, I don't remember, I don't know if you guys remember that, but when she said it, that clicked in my head because I remembered that shit clearly. It was dumb. Like, she was in a kendo stick match with Alexa Bliss, and if you get the kendo stick, you can use it. So Bayley gets the kendo stick down, and she is about to hit Alexa Bliss with it, and Alexa Bliss kind of, is balling up, like, please don't hit me. And then Bayley throws the kendo stick like she didn't need it, and then she ended up losing later because Alexa Bliss used the kendo stick. Now, it makes sense for the character, right? She, the aspirational babyface of Bayley is to not want to hit people who are unarmed with a weapon. But she didn't have an edge. And that's really what she felt like she needed in order to be in the bigger matches, is she felt like she needed an edge. And the character didn't have an edge, so the character was limiting. And basically she's talked about, and I felt like that was really interesting. I really loved that. That was dope, because you do consider like, yeah, how does a character fit into these individualized situations? And nobody really thought about that, but it seemed like somebody did. Kind of like, Bayley shouldn't be swinging a chair and swinging a kendo stick at people. She's a good person. She's a good guy. The ultimate good guy at that. She can't do that. And when you can't do that, you are limited. And you sometimes do look stupid. Like she looked stupid in the match with Alexa Bliss, where she had a kendo stick and she didn't use it. So that makes sense. So then she talked about the Elimination Chamber and she says like, the creation of the women's tag team titles, and that she was surprised they put the hugger gimmick in the Elimination Chamber, and because it's one of those matches that she didn't feel was for her, and they won the tag team titles, her and Sasha Banks, and she says like she didn't really take any time learning about tag team wrestling because she felt like she was a singles wrestler, even though she had tagged a lot with Sasha Banks and with Becky Lynch and all those people. She didn't really learn the psychology of being in a tag team at the time until they were the champions. So that was interesting too. And then she talked about losing the tag team titles to the Iconics at WrestleMania, and Austin once again kind of was needling a little bit and was like, okay, Charlotte and Becky Lynch are in the main event and you guys aren't. Like, how did you feel about that? And Bayley just kind of, she doesn't have the competitive edge that a guy would have. Obviously, women and men are different. And she basically says like, well, we weren't in the main event, but I felt like we were doing something just as important because it was the first time the women's tag team titles got to be on the show at WrestleMania. Like, we carried those titles to that show. We created them. And we got to be there for the Iconics to win them. So I felt like we were doing something that was just as good or just as important. And Steve's just kind of looking like, okay, I'll buy it. But it was another one of those, Bayley doesn't get to be in the main event. Bayley doesn't get to be a top star. And she lost at WrestleMania. And this also was something that came up later, that Bayley said she's never had a singles match for a title at WrestleMania, that she's always been in a tag team or a triple threat match or something. And that's one of her goals, that despite the fact that she's done so much already, one of her goals is to be in a singles match one-on-one at WrestleMania. And I was like, that's interesting, that because I never really thought about that. But her and Steve Austin, they agreed with me that they don't like triple threat matches or fatal four ways and stuff like that. And Steve Austin actually came out and said that he hates the Royal Rumble too. Well, he didn't like being in the Royal Rumble. And, I don't know about that one. I would love to be in the Royal Rumble. But he explained it like there was a chance it's a chance that too many fuck ups that could happen. But, they talked about Bayley being the Grand Slam champion when she was the first Grand Slam champion. And that when she won the Smackdown title. And then Bayley says that this was especially special for her, not only because she didn't realize that she was the only Grand Slam champion at the time, but she says it was the first time she really got to, run without Sasha Banks being there. And she says she felt like she got a chance to spread her wings. And, it didn't really work out. And then she talked about this SummerSlam thing with Ember Moon, which was it was a fucking travesty. I really was burying both of them. I wish I had started my channel earlier, because I buried the shit out of both of these women at the time. I was so mad at this situation. They suck so bad. But she says that the way it was pitched to her and the way that it was laid out and everything isn't the way that it went about. So it felt like the carpet had been yanked out from underneath them. And it didn't turn out the way that she wanted it. And it was a big blemish and, all that type of stuff. And I remember that SummerSlam was a big L. Both Bayley and Dean Ambrose flopped on that show at the same time. Like, because Dean Ambrose had to wrestle Dolph Ziggler. And Bayley had to wrestle Ember Moon. So you're talking about people who are, well, Dolph has personality, he has charisma, he has character and all that type of stuff. But you're trying to win the audience over with a work rate match, and they really couldn't get it done. And Bayley and Ember Moon also couldn't get it done, which was really weird. So then she talked about hitting the skids in 2019, how she wasn't really feeling it. She was losing confidence. And she said she wasn't being viewed the right way by the company. That she didn't feel like they were seeing her as a top star, even though she had been, Grand Slam champion and all this type of stuff. She didn't feel like they were positioning her correctly. She didn't feel valued. But she says, so then, Austin was like, how do you talk to Vince about this? Like, what do you do? Like, how do you approach him? And she said she would always approach him after the matches, asking like, is there anything I need to do? And he would just say, keep smiling, keep doing what you're doing great. But he wasn't, putting her in different positions. So then she said she was told to lose the SmackDown Women's title to Charlotte and then cry. And then she says, like, you know, she basically had to fight for this point because she couldn't be Bayley, the hugger, after she cried. She was like, I can do that part, but we need to change the character after that. Like, it needs to be changed completely. And she said, you know, she fought to change the character after, because it was like the death of the character. Once the character cries and breaks down in front of everybody, she can't continue doing that anymore, which makes perfect sense. Like, once you kind of break that hero character, you really can't go back. And so she says that she needed to shed the character, and that's where she came up with the idea to kill the Bayley buddies. And, you know, I thought, like, it was really a powerful moment. Like, it was really more powerful looking back on it because you know where she is now and that you can't go back. And that was really the idea of why she took an axe to the Bayley buddies, is she can't go back. That, you know, she had to, and she said after she did it, of course, after she killed the Bayley buddies and started kind of becoming more of a heel, or more, you know, more edgier, that she started to second guess herself. Like, she started to feel sad, you know, and even though it was a fresh start, she said, like, it was a last ditch effort to save my career. And then they showed the promo of her turning heel and about how she was trying to give and being giving, and that she gave headbands and high fives and all this sort of stuff. But what about me? And that's always a perfect thing for a heel, especially a magician heel, to ask. And I really want to get into the archetype videos and start talking about, you know, the different archetypes. But the magician is what I call about Bray Wyatt. It's all about, you know, being the keeper of secret knowledge, or, you know, the one who, the knower, as they call it. And Bayley was saying, like, she wanted to be the role model. Like, that's really what the hugger was supposed to be. The hugger was supposed to be a role model. But it was never expressly said, right? Like, she wanted to be relatable. She wanted to make wrestling accessible for young children and young girls and stuff like that. That's what she wanted to do. But the character was being rejected by the older audience. So she was saying in this promo that they played from SmackDown that the rejection is what made her who she is now. That, you know, it was the rejection of her wanting to be the role model that gave birth to the new sort of role model character that she's got. That she's still going to be a role model, she's just going to be differently. That now she's going to be the world's worst role model. And she says, like, you know, she said that the women's division is lazy and all that type of stuff. In the promo, she didn't say it, and she probably wouldn't have the heart to say that to Steve Austin and stuff like that. So she said, like, the heel turn needed to be realistic, and it needed to be something that people would gravitate to. And that's where she kind of got the idea for the role model. And she said she got it from Twitter, that people were saying, like, oh my God, you're such a role model, how could you do this? And she saw enough of it that she basically just picked up on it and just started using it. And she said, basically turning heel felt good, but she had a difficult time getting people to hate her and giving people a reason to hate her. And she was like, why should they hate me? You know, people needed to believe in me in order to hate me. And of course, she says, like, she wanted to be miserable. Like, she kind of had the idea of being Eddie Guerrero in WCW when he turned heel. And when she said that, I instantly remembered the Eddie Guerrero character when he turned heel, how moody he was and different things like that. She said she wanted to be that. And, you know, but it was a little too dark for her at the time. And then, you know, they hit the pandemic happened, and she had to find a way to interact with different people and entertain herself and stuff like that, because she couldn't play off the crowd. So, you know, but that I think that was really interesting too. And so they also talked about who helps her a lot. And she basically said, like, you know, Sasha Banks helps her a lot, and TJ Wilson also helps her a lot. He's the producer for the women in WWE. And so it was interesting. And she talked about, you know, the situation with Sasha Banks in 2020, how, you know, they didn't get to have as many matches as they wanted to as a tag team because the tag team championship run was really short, but they got to have fun this time. And of course, then they talked about, you know, Bayley and Sasha Banks, their entire run, their matches and all that type of stuff. I'm gonna skip that. And they talked about belts mattering, and I felt like this was pretty interesting too. Like, Bayley says that she had a 380-day run at one time, but she had lost the title to Charlotte, and then she won the title back 5 days later. So that's why they say it's 500 days as champion, because even though she did have that break as champion, where she lost the title and then won it back, that they just call it 500 days or whatever. And I thought like that was really interesting too. Like, Steve Austin was like, he's one of those guys where he says like, it's a work, but it's a shoot, right? And he puts you on the spot, and Bayley's like, yeah, like, yeah, like, so, basically he's talking about like, it's how the company sees you. They see you giving you this run. They obviously see value in you. And then Bayley was like, yeah, that's a good thing. So, and she's glad to have the company's trust that she can run with the title for over a year and be the champion all that time and be able to do all these different things. And that she was able to be leaned on and trusted during the pandemic to be a star. And her and Drew McIntyre have really broken out in 2020. And some people just kind of be like, well, they're not getting fan reaction, so it doesn't matter. But it's like they both found themselves without this fan reaction. They both found ways to interact and become bigger and more popular, even though they can't physically hear a crowd. And that is interesting. So Steve Austin asked her, what keeps her grounded? And she says basically what keeps her grounded is, time off and still having so much to do, because she's not seen as a star like Sasha or Bayley or Charlotte or Becky. I'm sorry, Sasha, Becky, or Charlotte. That she's not seen as being a star like they are. So that gives her more motivation to keep doing, what she's doing and keep finding ways to get better. And then she says that she needs to learn how to be more selfish, and that, helping others is natural, but she needs to be more selfish. And I love that Steve Austin kind of really bought into that. Like, he was like, yes, like finally somebody says it. like you can't help everybody and then screw yourself at the same time. So that's what she says. Like, she really wants to win the Royal Rumble and get a singles match at WrestleMania, not a fatal 4-way or a triple threat match or being a tag team, but she wants a singles match at WrestleMania. And, that's one of her goals. So, and it was really interesting that, and the last thing I saw, because this was like an hour and a half, it was way too long, was that Steve Austin had a beer with Bayley, Sasha, and Charlotte after a match or whatever. And I thought that was really interesting too, because it was like it had come full circle with him being one of her favorites and all that sort of thing, and her being a fan and still getting to be a fan even when she's backstage. So it was very, very interesting. It was, there's not a lot of, old school stories about people who are long dead and stuff like that, but Bayley is an interesting subject for these conversations, because she isn't the star that Charlotte and Becky and Sasha is. And that's why I thought it was really weird that Bayley was the one chosen to do this. Like you would think if you're trying to do the Broken Skull sessions and you're trying to have Steve Austin sit down with bigger stars, that choosing Drew McIntyre and Bayley to be sort of the main, the today's roster people, and not Austin sitting down with other legends, but sitting down with people who are still building legacies. It was very strange that they would pick Drew McIntyre and Bayley, who are considered to be people who aren't larger than life. They aren't, they've been the ones who are being blamed for low ratings and stuff like that. But you get to see like how difficult their stories have been. And Bayley being sort of the redheaded stepchild of the Four Horsewomen, and not being, even though Becky is literally a redhead, but she's not being promoted the same as they are, but she's gotten a lot more opportunities than most other women, and she's still saying like that's not enough. Like that's, like despite the fact that I was able to run with the title for 380 some odd days, you guys don't understand that I was basically just a champion to drop the belt to Sasha, and that was it. And it wasn't said, but that was pretty much the idea. They needed somebody to be the champion to crown Sasha, so it was Bayley, and that was pretty much it. And she is having a difficult time really breaking out of their shadow, And I was like, "Ooh, that is something to think about." Because in 20 years, when these people are considered legends, quote unquote legends, um, is it always going to be that way? Is it always going to be Bayley is probably still going to be around because she's a super fan and she's always going to be a fan? But what happens when Sasha kind of outgrows WWE? Like a lot of people see that happening already. That Sasha Banks is going to be in TV in Hollywood and all that type of stuff. It's like, yeah, that's I can see that happening. I can see Sasha being shuffled off to Hollywood, in a few years or whatever. What happens to Bayley then? What happens to Charlotte and Becky? Becky starting a family at this point, and what is going to happen if Becky decides to have more kids? Or what happens if Charlotte decides to hang it up, and we're left with basically just Bayley. Then what? Is she going to be seen as being on the same level as they are? And she basically says that as of right now, no, the company doesn't see her as being as big a star as the others, and she's working to get that respect. And maybe she'll end up being like maybe like the Bret Hart of the Four Horsewomen, where she's not the biggest personality, but she's the best worker, and she is the most grounded, the most relatable, the most accessible. And maybe that's going to be the case. Maybe that will be her legacy. Maybe that her legacy will be that maybe she isn't a Hollywood like Sasha, a mainstream star. Maybe she won't be, have the legacy of Charlotte or Becky, but she has, a different type of groundswell of people who appreciate what she really did. And it probably won't become, she'll probably be like a Dolph Ziggler. Maybe in 10 years, people talking about how great Bayley was. But, it was interesting to sit down and to watch this and, to get those little nuggets. And that maybe I should watch these things more often and, and pay attention to them. Because it was really interesting. But let me know what you guys thought if you watched it. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, spread the good word of 3 Count commentaries, spread the good word of the magnificent MagMongoSlade. I thank you guys for your time, and I'll talk to you guys later.